Good afternoon, and welcome to Matter of Sorts, a virtual version of Matter. My name is Stephen Collins. I'm the CEO of Matter. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that we thought about whether we should postpone or cancel this program in light of current events, and then decided that actually a program that's focused on mental health would probably be quite a benefit now, and so we kept it. I'll say another word about that in a moment. For those of you who aren't familiar with Matter, we are a healthcare technology incubator and innovation hub, and we really do three things. We incubate startups. We work with now more than 200 healthcare startups and growth stage companies, and we have a suite of services to help them at every stage of growth, from idea through to scaling into the market. We are also a nexus for the healthcare community, where we bring together people who are passionate about healthcare innovation and healthcare technology and healthcare entrepreneurship to have conversations that are designed to inspire, to educate, and to connect people, kind of like the one that we're going to have in a moment. And the third thing that we do is work with large established healthcare entities to help them innovate better, to help them collaborate with entrepreneurs to source solutions and advance more quickly the innovations that they can help develop that can really improve the healthcare experience. Today, delighted to have Meghan Jones-Bell as our guest. She is the Chief Science Officer for Headspace, which I believe is a company that I feel like everyone in the universe has heard of, but maybe it's just my universe. Dr. Bell leads the company's science team, which focuses on developing evidence-based interventions, clinically validating the benefits of Headspace, and she also oversees two of Headspace's businesses, Headspace for Work and Headspace Health, and we'll get into that. And she is also an assistant professor at Stanford and has been involved for many, many years in the field of mental health. When we were first planning this program, it was in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has taken quite a significant toll on mental health worldwide, and certainly in the United States and worldwide. And we thought this would be a really timely and relevant subject to dig into. The events of the last 10 days or so, I think, have only made this more relevant. We've seen another set of events that I think for many people have kind of pulled back the curtain on what African Americans have been living with every day of their lives. And for a lot of people, it's been a very depressing. It's brought up a lot of uncomfortable emotions, sadness and anxiety and confusion. You layer on top of that the protests and the violence, and it is all of that layered on top of COVID-19, and it's really quite a challenging environment for many people from a mental health perspective. So I think the conversation, Meghan, that we can have will be even more relevant now than it was when we first started contemplating this. So let's jump into it. First of all, thank you again for joining us. Really appreciate it. The effects of COVID-19 have had a huge effect on mental health, and we've seen that reported on and studied. And I'm wondering when it is that you realized the importance of Headspace and the difference that Headspace could make in your role in the midst of this global crisis.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Stephen and Matter, for inviting me to be with you today. We made the decision to close our office several days before the safer at home order was put in place here in Los Angeles, and actually close our global offices at the same time. And it was really in that decision space of a few days when we were thinking about, the impact and on the safety and health of our employees, that we realized we need to catapult ourselves into action to support the mental health consequences of this pandemic. And because it was increasingly clear that it was going to be changing our lives in a pretty profound way. So it was at that point where we, kicked off a number of different initiatives to really think through how Headspace could best support the mental health of a large number of people. Some people might not know Headspace has a number of social impact initiatives that have been long-standing. Historically, there are things that we've done through partnerships with a number of different organizations, but don't kind of toot our own horn about. So one of the things we were in the position of being able to immediately move those initiatives to a broader platform and scale. So specifically what I'm talking about is we have pre-existing commitments to make Headspace free for all educators in K through 12 education in all English speaking countries. English, just because that's our first language. We're now in multiple different languages, so do plan to expand from there. But one, we could immediately try to support teachers and parents through our existing platform as they transition to how do I become a homeschooling parent while I'm trying to work? How do I adapt to this new environment? A lot of stress comes along with that, so it felt like an important population to support. We also, for at least over a year, have supported free access to Headspace by healthcare professionals because of the documented higher rates of burnout among that profession. And so we had previously, our strategy was to work with professional associations like the American Medical Association and health systems across the country to integrate Headspace as a benefit for their patient-facing team members. So really focused on doctors, nurses, pharmacists, mental health professionals, et cetera. What we did is basically ungate access. So we started with anybody who has a national provider identifier because it was something we could build in a weekend. That ungated access immediately for a large number of people. We followed that up with a number of other ways of enabling broad access to healthcare professionals, and then carried that commitment across our primary markets. So starting with the US, we then made Headspace free a few weeks later for all employees of the National Health Service in the UK. We then followed that with a partnership with the Ministry of Health in France to make Headspace free for all of their doctors. So we do try to do things, across our key markets and globally, but we also immediately, so this was in that first, big push over a weekend for us, selected content that we already had that we felt would be most appropriate for the kind of mental health problems people were likely to experience during this pandemic. So anxiety, managing uncertainty, and change, stress, sleep problems, mindful movement that you can do without leaving your apartment. So we pulled together a range of content that, for us, that is mindfulness, both including guided meditations, but also mindful, activities like, different exercises, mindful walking, etc., sleep wind downs. We curated that content. We put it in the app in a featured collection. We also put it on our website so that it was ungated and freely accessible. So for us, really, it became this, what is the first wave of initiatives and the second wave of initiatives, but felt that, we had an important role to play. We are socially committed and felt that, we need to help however we can.
It's really amazing in a lot of way. I want to come back to something you said, which is that you already made Headspace available to any K through 12 teacher in English speaking countries. I mean, that's a huge number of people. What was the rationale for that? What was the business decision? How did that decision come to be?
So we actually, people might not know the Headspace founding story, which provides a little context for why, as a company, we feel really comfortable doing things like this. We started as a nonprofit live events, doing live events in the UK. And this was our founder, Andy and Rich, burned out ad exec, former Buddhist monk, typical founding story. So they started with these 8-hour long live events, teaching people meditation. And as you can imagine, not with the goal of, normalizing this, expanding access. So in the service of that, you got to start to shorten that 8-hour workshop. But starting with that in our DNA of, they didn't start a company to make money. They started a company to make mindfulness kind of universally relevant, move it out of a zone of spirituality, though that's great if that's, the way that you engage with it. But we really wanted they wanted to demystify this practice because while you can use it in a larger pursuit, there are also techniques that bring awareness and compassion and relief to so many people. And so for us, really, that's always been our North Star. Our vision is to improve the health and happiness of the world. And how better, the best way for us to do that is through prevention and through reaching people when they're young. And so supporting teachers is one of the most effective way of supporting kids outside of supporting parents, because you can bring this practice into the classroom if the teacher themselves are supported in learning and practicing mindfulness. It's a great way for them to pass it on, but we equip them with a number of different ways of integrating mindfulness into their social and emotional learning curriculum, actually playing Headspace sessions that are child appropriate, so developmentally tailored in the classroom. And I mean, you just imagine if you had been introduced to this set of skills to help you manage your emotions, find awareness, cultivate compassion for yourself and others. Imagine at a young age, if that was something that you had learned, kind of how much that would have helped you throughout your life, what an amazing foundation that would be for all of us. So, that's where it comes from. It's a goal of, we need to have a viable business. And thankfully, there are a lot of people that need our help. So we're in the fortunate position of being able to give it away for free.
As we were talking before this started, and your ultimate dream of not having to work anymore because what you're doing isn't necessary, but unfortunately it is.
I have the reverse ambition of most entrepreneurs. I'm not planning on retiring because I sold a company. It's because mental health is fully addressed. So, I might be working for a while.
Unfortunately, that's probably the case. In terms of the physicians and the sort of frontline healthcare workers that you've made that Headspace available to, also for free, have you seen good uptake and adoption around from that community?
We've seen incredible adoption, which, frankly, for those who had access through, our partnerships, like with American Medical Association previously, and many other health systems and organizations. But certainly during COVID, we have seen increases in usage. The primary content used is managing stress and our sleep wind downs. So sleep-related mindfulness practices seems to be the most popular types of content among healthcare professionals. But for them, they see the value in this. They need help. They're kind of they're carrying the double burden of living through all the same things we are and being on the front lines of it. And so, and have as a caregiver in a caring profession, they may be the only person with somebody at the end of their life because their family members aren't able to be with them. So think about the compassion that they need to cultivate, and the empathy and the amount of suffering that they're sitting with. One of the key aspects of mindfulness is learning how to sit with your own suffering as well as the suffering of others. And we don't, our society doesn't teach us that. And so, many of us grew up in homes where we haven't really learned how to do that. We might avoid those uncomfortable feelings that come along with being with somebody. And so that's really what mindfulness is about. It comes down to awareness and compassion. And so not only are we trying to help support their resilience, their stress management, sleeping better, but the core essence of what Headspace is really, I think, resonates with a profession that often, got into it to help people.
It's interesting that you say it resonates with that profession. When, yeah, I mean, I feel like, and there was a point in time, sometime in the last 10 or 20 years or something like that, where it became acceptable in the United States to talk about meditation. And it wasn't it wasn't always like that, at least in my world, and I think in sort of a mainstream context. When did meditation become a recognized and sort of accepted part of mental health treatment and mental health management in the United States and Western countries?
It's a great question. So, while meditation has been around for thousands of years, and it's certainly been practiced in this country for a long time, the work of Jon Kabat-Zinn and his development of mindfulness-based stress reduction and the enormous evidence base that he and other researchers and clinicians developed in support of that intervention, which is essentially, for people who aren't familiar with it, it's an 8-week program where you're typically going to in-person classes once a week, and then you're instructed to practice different meditation or mindfulness exercises for about an hour every day. So it's a fairly intensive intervention. And because they started by integrating this into healthcare, they established that evidence base. It got credibility in the medical community really in the 80s. Psychology was a little late to the party, but we followed. I'm a clinical psychologist, so I can say that. This has been something explored, but our evidence based on psychology for this what we call third wave of cognitive behavioral therapy, which are interventions like acceptance and commitment therapy, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, dialectical behavior therapy. These are therapies that, when I was in graduate school, were starting to become recognized as evidence-based interventions. They were starting to be integrated into the standard of care for the treatment of mental health disorders. And so, while if you had a GI condition, you may have been referred to MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, you may have actually had that before you had access to it in a behavioral health context. And so we now have a great evidence base across multiple different populations and use cases, and have really consistent evidence for how meditation specifically can impact people, their mental and their physical health.
And just clarify one thing. Did you say that the guy's name at the beginning was Jon Kabat-Zinn?
Jon Kabat-Zinn, Z-I-N-N. Yeah.
Okay.
No,
I thought you
no.
said Zen, and I was going to say that's just a fantastic coincidence, but got it. And what about the US versus other countries? Has there been different adoption rates, or what does that look like on a global level?
Yeah, in terms of meditation in general. So you
Yeah,
know, it is quite variable by country. So the UK and the US tend to be more at parity. Germany is pretty close in terms of adoption of mindfulness and meditation. The We also, of course, in countries like India, where it's really part of their cultural heritage, see that these practices were there. This is where they came from. The younger generations, though, what we found in a lot of our research and what you can see in other primary research is that often it's how people actually relate to the practice. People who are more like millennial generation, they want to practice it in a more in a more novel way, in a more contemporary way. So that is a little bit demystified. So we see a rise there. Markets like France and other countries in Europe, it's present, but it's much earlier. It's like where we were 7 years ago. So,
interesting.
the CDC has done a report showing growth in yoga and meditation actually being much greater um, than yoga, more like 12% over the last, I think it's like a 10-year period. But this certainly is on the rise in terms of becoming more normalized. And the other markets around the world, we just see they're still trending in that direction. They just might be a little bit behind.
Interesting. So the US is ahead of is it ahead of the UK also?
I think they're pretty equivalent, actually. The UK may be a little ahead of us in terms of investing in prevention and investing in culture change around
Yeah.
mental health, like destigmatization. So, a lot of our conversations there, we don't need to convince them, like a company or the country, to address mental health. They don't need to be told the ROI of it. They're already there. They just want something that will be used and has an evidence base. So it's really this combination. They're already at the point of examining engagement and outcomes, not tell me why I should care about the problem. And so, but I think it's really the incredible work of many advocates and organizations. In the UK, the Royals have also really actively participated in that cultural conversation around mental health. And so they are a little advanced beyond us in terms of how they talk about it.
Got it. What you mentioned millennials, and you mentioned a couple different categories. Who is when you go out to market Headspace? Who's the Headspace customer? When you segment the population, what is the thread um, that links what a Headspace customer is and looks like?
Yeah. So we have Headspace members in 190 countries. We also have members using the product in 5 different languages. And our population, we do see pretty healthy representation across the age continuum. Of course, we're not selling it to children, but parents are using it with children, so that's represented as well. And as technology becomes more ubiquitous, that's certainly trended to be, more of a normal distribution across the population. We do see higher rates of usage among people anywhere from like 25 to 45. But that's not to discount still like very sizable groups of people who are older than 45. So yeah, across the board, pretty even rates of men and women.
And is it tend to be, working professionals or middle class or urban areas versus rural, or is it just
Yeah.
across the board?
We serve so many different groups in different ways, and that's very intentional. So our members, if you look at people who can afford to buy a premium subscription, that's going to skew coastal. It's going to skew urban and suburban. It's also going to skew, more white. But that is actually the rationale behind why we have social impact initiatives. We have an investment in enterprise partnerships and healthcare partnerships such that we can work with companies, we can work with health insurers and health systems to bring access to populations that cannot afford to buy a subscription to an app themselves. And that's important. It's, those are, of course, from a, there's an entrepreneur audience, like there's a business rationale to do that. There's also a mission rationale to do that in terms of, when we work with a company like Starbucks, who's one of our partners, we can, through that relationship, enable access to baristas across the world, and who aren't typically a group that can afford to buy a subscription to an app. And so this does come into play in how we choose to target our customers. And for us, we really want to work with companies across the board, of course, to support mental health, but we get really excited when our partnerships allow us to reach populations with unmet need.
Got it. And you said you don't market it to kids. Do high school kids use this? I mean, you read all the time about the stresses of being a modern day high school kid, and even how that's gotten potentially more complicated and worse in the last few months. And
yeah, we do. We have quite a few because we have a family plan. And so parents can actually buy this and then enable access for their teenagers. So this is, something that's great for teenagers who want to do something by themselves. Though we do hear from a lot of families that have a practice together, which is such a wonderful thing to do, to have that shared. If you're going to do a 10-minute meditation as a family, I'm still working on that with my 3-year-old. We do our Sesame Street meditations together. We have a partnership with Sesame Street, so he manages those. But teenagers, it's so important for teenagers to look after their mental health, and they may not really want to talk to anybody about it. So having a private way of creating some space for themselves and learning techniques that are universally relevant is really important.
Well, if you solve it for 3-year-olds, as the father of a 2-year-old, that would be an incredible accomplishment. And you have a lot of people knocking on your door for that one.
Yeah.
Before I ask the next question, I'll just mention to everyone listening, if you have a question you would like to ask, use the chat function and submit that. Some people have been doing that, and I'll try to weave those into the conversation as we go. Meghan, you run the science team, and you're a scientist. And can you talk about the importance to the company and to you of having science-backed, clinically validated solutions? And I ask that in the context of, there are a gazillion mental health apps out there of one sort or another that you can go find. Talk about the differences and what it means, and the primacy that you put around science in the products that you're developing.
Yeah, it's really core to our DNA. We really have two things that must be true of our approach. One is that we want to work with authentic experts, so to make sure that we really have a qualified expertise behind our content, as well as science. And so what that looks like is investing both in ensuring our approach is based on evidence, as well as that we invest in that second step of validation. And so Headspace has actually had a science team for most of its existence. We have been collaborating with academic researchers around the world for years, and that's actually led us to have, one of the largest evidence a very large evidence base, but also one of the largest research portfolios of any digital health company, particularly in the mental health space. So to date, we have about 26 published peer review papers. Those are, to be really accurate, those are some efficacy trials, which are rigorous, very conclusive studies. When you take them in aggregate, which is the standard of how you interpret evidence, you need multiple studies to point in the same direction. We also, some of those 26 are more early stage exploratory, because we pursue answering questions that are not known. And so you need to start with exploratory research, follow that with efficacy trials, move into effectiveness, move into cost effectiveness. There's a life cycle, as you well know, Stephen, of research. And so a lot of people wouldn't expect a meditation app to mirror that academic and industry approach, but we do. And, we have about 50 studies underway with academic partners right now. Coming out of academia myself, which was like a painful decision to rip myself out of, we have maintained the ethical parameters of independent research and how we work with outside researchers, so that they really have freedom to publish whatever they find. Our goal is to provide as much transparency and credibility through rigorous research methods, so that people understand how mindfulness can help them. Our goal is not to present this as a panacea. Our goal is to have this adopted appropriately based on evidence into standards of care. And so that's why we really do want to help consumers, help companies, help decision makers, help doctors, psychologists, etc. Anybody who's deciding about the care of a population to make informed decisions. And having researched digital mental health interventions my whole life, things are not created equally. And so while it may look the same on the surface, it's really important to look under the hood and ensure that a specific product is actually bringing to life the benefits that you'd expect.
Yeah, talk more about that looking under the hood. So if, what is it that what's the DNA of something that's under the hood, but it may look just like something one of your competitors puts out, or just something, there's just a lot floating around out there. What's different about how you create products that create the scientific validity?
Well, it's really about one, if you have the people who understand the evidence base, like an evidence-based intervention. I can give you an example, maybe to make it really clear. So Headspace, in our app, we have a course that's called Sleep Health. And our approach to developing that was, one, started with a member need, because everything we do starts with desirability in a kind of human-centered way. So we realized that people were using our meditations at bedtime to help them fall asleep. We also had a range of content that was really designed with the goal of helping people relax at bedtime. It wasn't like framed as a sleep intervention per se. And so we actually realized we need to do more to support helping people fall asleep. So we engaged an outside expert, actually from Northwestern, Jason Ong, who's a professor there, who's developed mindfulness-based therapy for insomnia. So Dr. Ong worked with our team, our content team, our science team, to adapt his intervention to be delivered in our app. And we are in a series of studies to examine how that actually works. It's available, it's low risk, it's not going to do harm, but we're certainly not claiming anything about it until we actually put it through that full validation process. And so, often I think many of the entrepreneurs in your community who are working on mental health may find themselves in this, situation of, if I have something that could help people right now and it's based on evidence, should I put it out into the world or should I keep it back? If it is, if it's low risk, if it's squarely based on evidence, yes, as long as you have the right understanding of safety and how to manage risk, such that like if you're receiving data, you need to do something with it if somebody writes in and tells you that they're need more help. So there's a different set of concerns. But if you are wanting to actually make claims about something and market it as an effective intervention for stress or for anxiety or for depression, that's where you really do need to have a solid evidence base behind your specific product. Because I've done studies where we had head-to-head controls. This is before, and this outside of Headspace. This was with my last company, and when I was at Stanford, we had multiple apps in the same study, and we had to discontinue because some were just performing so poorly for the same problem, looked the same. They were all CBT apps, but in one case, we had to stop it because no one used the other product. And so it was just unethical to provide an active control that nobody used. And so, whether it's a lack of engagement or it just doesn't drive the efficacy that you need, this is, there's really, it comes down to ethical concerns in my view.
That's really interesting. We deal with that frequently with companies that are trying to decide. Everybody wants evidence, but they're trying to decide how to approach that. And one extreme go through the FDA, and the other extreme just put something out, and there's a lot of gray area here.
Yeah.
And one of the businesses that you are work overseeing is Headspace Health. Can you describe what that is, and along these lines?
Absolutely. So Headspace Health is our digital therapeutics subsidiary. It is a company that we've established within Headspace that is charged with the goal of developing new treatments for the management of chronic conditions. And so this is new products that will really use mindfulness as part of the approach to chronic disease management. We are going through, so these set of products, given that they are framed as treatments, which is different from our general wellness offering via our consumer and enterprise product, we will be are going through a rigorous clinical trial process. We have quality management system for our software. It is, will most likely be either a regulated medical device or a healthcare service. And so given our, this country's current regulatory and commercial paths, but that product won't go out without a clinical trial behind it. So that's kind of an example of where there is risk, because we're telling people that we can help treat them.
Right. And what's the trajectory? Where are you in the process, and what are you starting with? What interventions?
So we're top secret about that. Sorry.
Oh,
we
sorry.
Yeah, Stephen. There's lots of guesses out there, so it's fun for me to see what people think we're going to do. Which is interesting, because there is a broad research on mindfulness-based approaches to chronic conditions. But we are in a clinical trial stage, so we have built a product. We're testing it.
That's great. Well, I can't wait to find out what it is.
I cannot wait to tell people.
I bet. Have you observed differences in the beneficial effects of meditation, either for a therapeutic benefit or for a wellness benefit, of technology-aided meditation versus what people have been doing for thousands of years without the benefit of technology? Is there any measurable difference, or has that been have you looked at that?
It's actually been looked at by the broader mindfulness research community as well. Many researchers, some of the most well-known researchers in the field of mindfulness who had been researching in person very long forms of meditation intervention have shifted to looking at 10-minute digitally delivered doses. So
Interesting.
you kind of go across this cast of very well-known, very well-respected researchers. They're essentially testing the same thing as a headspace intervention at this point. And so the research that we have done, the research that we have about to publish, the research that they're doing. So, this is not just us talking about our own stuff here. It certainly shows that many of the same outcomes can be delivered in a shorter form of digitally delivered mindfulness. So this is, still, of course, early stage, science. We have 26 papers at various stages in that scientific journey. These other researchers also have handfuls of studies. So, this is, like, to be fair, it's still an early chapter in a long history of mindfulness research. But when you have rigorously done research that all points in the same direction, you can feel pretty comfortable that this is doing something. We also know that we have millions of people who are telling us this is helping reduce their stress, improve their resilience, help them, like, manage burnout, feel like they're show up for their kids and their families with more patience and compassion. This
Yeah.
does have mindfulness as a practice. It's very well established at this point.
And what are the outcomes that I understand in Headspace Health, presumably with your clinical studies, you're looking at some condition and there's a therapeutic benefit that you can measure relative to that particular condition. When you're looking at wellness and the papers that you've published, what are the outcomes that you're measuring and tracking?
So we typically measure core mindfulness skills just to make sure that we are actually achieving that. So usually check the box there. We also, our most common measures are looking at stress. So we're using perceived stress. We typically look at anxiety, at depressive symptoms. We look at burnout and resilience, because if you think about stress and burnout and then resilience, what we try to see is, are we bringing down stress for people who have high, moderate to high stress? And then once we get them there, is that a durable effect? And are we helping people who don't have high stress remain resilient to stress? And so we actually have we commissioned a neuroimaging study to look at, whether our app actually helps people who are in jobs that have, chronically stressful jobs, so they can't control their environment. Can Headspace actually help buffer them to the effects of chronic stress? We don't know the results yet, but this is we really like to explore unanswered questions, and there's certainly some evidence base, but that hasn't been very thoroughly explored with novice meditators. Certainly not in as rigorous of a study as we're doing. So
that'll be fascinating when.
well,
yeah, I can't wait to see
yeah.
that. And what are? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, the other set of benefits I've just talked about, kind of individual level ones. We also have done a series of social psychology experiments with an academic partner where we looked at people's behavior after 3 weeks of using Headspace for 10 minutes a day. And we did one study, what they found was that 3 weeks of Headspace was associated with more compassionate behavior. People were more likely to help another person in need. And in the other study, these both had active controls, so were well done studies. In the other scenario study, they had people were less likely to respond aggressively when provoked. And so, these social psychology experiments are always kind of sound funny when you talk about the details of them, because they're fun, interesting scenarios, but they do have evidence of generalizing to the real world. So, we do tend to look at this set of interpersonal behaviors and outcomes in addition to those individual benefits.
And do you have, I'm just going to keep this, I find this topic really fascinating. And And are there, so you mentioned a neuroimaging study, which I think will be really interesting to see. A lot of the other things that you've mentioned, I think are patient-reported outcomes. Are there quantitative measures that you or anybody else is using to study the effects of meditation? Is that possible? Is there anything that you would, are there parameters that are measurable that demonstrate the physiological benefits of meditation?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So the results that I've talked about with patient-reported outcomes are all what we have done already. Many of our active studies have objective measures of outcome, because that's one of the things that I felt is really important for us, is to complement that, individual reported outcome with the things that might actually get this reimbursed, and also help change public perception. It's not just, self-report is valid, but it doesn't have a great reputation all the time. So, given that stress is one of our primary indicators of a response, we do look at blood cortisol in a number of studies, looking at heart rate variability. We have lab-based studies where we're looking at focus and mind wandering with objective paradigms. As I mentioned, we have funded one brain imaging study. We have another that's been going on for 3 years. We also look at healthcare resource use. So we do some HEOR research as well as looking at employment-related outcomes, absenteeism, presenteeism, etc. So, for us, we really want to examine this holistic view of engagement, individual kind of palpable benefits, as well as objective health outcomes and some of those economic outcomes as well.
So you've painted a picture of what sounds to me like a pretty rigorous scientific and research arm or component of Headspace. Something, when I think about a pharmaceutical company, you assume that a pharmaceutical company is going to have a meaningful R&D arm, because that's where their products come from. You don't assume that that is the case with an app company. And I was wondering, are there tensions inside the company between, the business imperative that you're driving towards and the science imperative that seems to be so important to, obviously, you, but also, there's an enormous amount of resources that you've just described in all these studies and the way you're approaching things. How does the company balance business and science?
So for us, science has the founders have always been extremely committed to science. So that certainly helps and always has justified that investment even before there was a direct business outcome. They did it because they felt that they should at the beginning. And at this point, science is directly connected to the business strategy that we have across a number of our growth areas. So when we sell Headspace to employers as a health benefit, they, at this point, are digging into our evidence. They're expecting us to be able to not only point to that in this, evaluation process when they determine, which vendor are we going to work with, but they also expect us to deliver and improve those outcomes to them with their own population. And so, for me, it's like, it's not enough to just use it to get your foot in the door. You then, in the way that we structure many of our relationships, we need to deliver if we want to keep that customer. And that's, it's becoming increasingly true in a crowded mental health space selling to employers. They are increasingly, fortunately, being given guidance to evaluate, their mental health resources, which increasingly are digital, across different dimensions of adoption, engagement, of data security and privacy, of evidence, et cetera. And so you do need to invest in your capabilities to meet those rising expectations. And then certainly in healthcare, if and this is where it becomes a strategy question. You could certainly, without any evidence base, just be added as a perk by an employer, by a health insurance company wanting to get some consumer friendly offering. But if you're really looking to integrate into healthcare, to get a doctor to refer a patient to an app, it's going to need to have a solid evidence base behind it. And certainly to be, on a digital formulary, which is where, many of these apps end up, so that they can then be prescribed. You're going to need to go through a number of hurdles. Evidence is one of them.
So you mentioned the companies you're working with. So you have I think almost 1,000 companies that are part of Headspace for Work, which is one of the other businesses that you oversee. Can you describe how that works, and what is that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Headspace for Work is our offering to companies who are looking to provide a mental health benefit to their employees to help them better manage stress, and learn and apply mindfulness to multiple aspects of their lives. And so typically, companies are working with us to not only buy Headspace in bulk for their employees as a benefit, not a perk anymore, but also what they get is we have a whole customer support team that is working with them to ensure effective implementations. Our customer success team goes on site, does trainings when we were able to do that. Now we're doing, increasing numbers of webinars. We have built a capability of, very efficiently enabling access through, eligibility files and other things. I mean, for us in working with companies, it's a lot more than simply here's the app, disseminate it. It's an ongoing partnership of learning how to most effectively raise awareness about this as a benefit to the employees. So really linking arms on marketing internally to their employees. And actually just right before this got off a webinar for one of our customers. So we are trying to really support them right now through the crisis. So many are looking for us for, additional resources on how they have a compassionate culture at work, how they integrate mindfulness into, really the day-to-day behaviors. They want to know what we're doing to support the mental health of our employees so that we can kind of guide them in doing, the same. So it really is a more holistic way of supporting companies.
Got it. We're getting close to the end of the session, so I want to ask you two more questions, and then we're going to have a mini meditation guided by from Headspace, of course, guided by Andy, who I think has the greatest voice in the world. So question one is a little bit tangential, but I'm going to ask it to you anyway, which is that a lot of us are having just the weirdest dreams ever since this coronavirus thing started. And you have mentioned that Headspace is relevant for sleep, and I'm just curious your take on, what's with all the crazy dreams, and is Headspace a potential solution to that?
So, outside of a brief period of supervision during graduate school by a psychoanalyst, not kind of driving without a license with us talking about dreams. But, the science of dreaming, as far as I'm aware, it's really the time when our brains are repairing, they're consolidating long-term memory. And so just, this is the time to kind of have some compassion for your brain in just the unbelievable amount that we are processing right now, as we read the news, as we talk to our loved ones, as we have compassion for what our communities are going through, and particularly, people of color or Black community. And as you empathize with that, that's what comes back to our conversation about sitting with suffering. There's a lot to process. If you're watching these videos of what, brutality, that's really hard to know what to do with. And so no wonder people might be having more vivid dreams, because it's really your brain kind of sorting through that. And I always think back to that Pixar movie, where people are sorting through the about emotion.
Yeah, the bowling balls into the.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite meditation? Do you have a go-to within the Headspace collection that you would recommend we try?
Yeah, I actually love we have a different meditation that's featured every day in the app. So we have two things that change every day. One is the wake up, which is a short video on something related to how you live mindfully. That's accompanied by a very brief meditation practice. And then right underneath that in the app is a different meditation that's on a different topic. So you have a bit of a reflection that Andy guides you through, and then you have the meditation. I love that because it gives me, as somebody who's practiced meditation for like a decade or more at this point, okay, a lot more. At this point, it's wonderful to have something, a new dimension to add, which is why, like, you certainly can learn and practice this on your own. I used Headspace before I worked at Headspace because I just love having that novelty of something to reflect on. Other than that, I'd recommend Compassion right now. That feels pretty important.
Indeed. Well, I will let you introduce the mini meditation that we'll have available. And we'll just say thank you very much for joining us, for sharing, for this conversation. Really fascinated in the research that'll be coming out, and look forward to seeing those studies come to fruition, and looking forward to seeing what you and Headspace continue to do, both vis-a-vis the current challenges that we're facing, and going forward when hopefully these things are all behind us. So with that, I will turn it over to you to introduce the mini meditation.
All right. Well, thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Matter. And I can't wait to see what this group of entrepreneurs comes up with to push this field forward even further. One of the things people often say is, meditation's hard. How do I learn? You have to start with something, and any place to start is great. And so what we're about to do is really just an onboarding to meditation. It's a very short practice. You can do it. Andy will guide you through it. But my recommendation is try to sit comfortably, keep your eyes open or closed, depending on what feels right to you. And if you can keep this up, you can build on it over time. So thank you.
So sitting comfortably, just taking a big deep breath in through the nose, out through the mouth. As you breathe in, noticing how the body expands. As you breathe out, just watching the body soften as you gently close the eyes. And rather than the mind leading the breath, allow the breath to lead the mind. Notice the sensation of the breath. Notice it where you feel it in the body. If you need to, you can just gently place your hand on the stomach. And just following that rising and falling sensation. Nothing else to do. Allowing thoughts to come and go. And when you're ready, just gently opening the eyes again.